Well, good evening, or is it good morning? It's after midnight, and I must be sleepwalking. Listening to a little bit of music as I contemplate love. So, my videos are more about being transparent, not hiding my humanity, but within it, showing the effect of God's love and influence on my life. I don't care about my hair or how I look. It's not the number one priority. These videos are about what's in my heart. As I seek God with all my heart, it changes my heart. And I'm just sharing with people what's important to me and why. I'm not here on my videos telling people how to live. I'm not here saying turn or burn or whatever. But it's loving people enough to say, I'm human. I've made mistakes. My parents, my family shaped and molded me, but also the choices I made, how I responded and dealt with pain and heartache and mistreatment. And I can't say that I've excelled at what I've done up until this point. Time and time again, lately, I look at Joseph in the Bible, and I look at Peter. I look at Peter because since I was rear-ended, I'm more emotional and reactive and expressive than I was before. It's hard to figure out, was that from the accident or is that from after God healed my heart and removed the vow I made when I was 20 that I'd never date again, taking all the broken emotions and wounds and pain and sealed everything up inside of me. And God took that out of me one night. My wife had sent me a text because we weren't talking at the time. And it was horrifying news about her metastatic breast cancer. The 20 plus tumors throughout her body were growing. She had new ones in her lungs. She had a vertebra in her spine that was broken, fractured. And I ran out and got them some special dessert, something we normally would do as a family when we were together. And yet now we weren't. But I wasn't going to let Satan steal another day with this horrifying news. I'd asked her via text, did she have chocolate? She's like, well, I was kind of concerned about money and didn't want to spend it on stuff that wasn't a necessity. And that wasn't okay with me. And I didn't tell her what I was doing. It's like I just stopped texting. This is in the middle of COVID, and I ran down to one of our favorite places we'd go as a family and picked up some cheesecake. And I did it for the whole family. Stopped by the house, dropped it off, and then came back to where I was staying out in the wilderness. It's about 5 to 7 miles away from where my house is that my wife and I have together, but I haven't been staying there. And I dropped them off, but after I dropped them off, I came back to where I was staying and went upstairs into the third story of this home. It's a friend of mine that I hadn't seen since I was 12 years old, and here it was August of 2020. So I was almost 54 years old. Actually, this is after August when this took place. This is, let's see, when was this exactly? I don't think I'd had my surgery yet. No. But I came back to where I was living alone, out in the wilderness, on 2 acres, 3-story home in the middle of being renovated. And guess what? I'm still in the middle of a house being renovated. This friend of mine that I hadn't seen since I was 12, I've been staying in his homes since August of 2020. God prepared a place for me to stay 6 months before I needed it when he and I crossed paths. And since it'd been a little bit of time, I'd gained almost 100 pounds since he'd last seen me, and he'd gained probably 150 pounds. He had no hair, and yet we both, inside our heads, knew each other. Why? Because God whispered into our heads. At the back of my head, I heard, hey, you know him. But I was in a very broken, imprisoned place at the time. And in front of my head was yelling loud at me, no, you don't. So I just kept walking. But we ended up meeting because he had also, this friend of mine that I hadn't seen in 41 years, had the same small voice, but he wasn't in bondage. He wasn't imprisoned. He wasn't in the midst of a battle inside of his mind and his heart. And so I've been staying at his places. So I'm alone on the third floor. Go back into my bedroom there at this house. And I was flat out on the floor like a fish out of water, flopping around, sobbing and weeping uncontrollably. Because here is the woman I love, my only wife. I've only been married once. The only other marriage that I will have is when I go to heaven, to be one with Christ. But I get this horrifying news. I already know my wife has stage 4 cancer. She's in a wheelchair, partially paralyzed from radiation damage to her spinal cord. And I get this horrifying news that the woman I love, the mother of my children, the woman God gave me, is possibly in the final season of her life, alone. And it just tore me apart. So I'm sobbing and weeping uncontrollably. And I hear that same small voice. Can I take that? It was God wanting to take away all that pain that was inside my heart that I'd sealed up when I was 20. I was scared. I didn't trust him. I trusted him for salvation, and that was it. Because I wasn't whole. I wasn't healed. I wasn't well. But I understood about free will. I understood that God will not force himself on us. He protects our free will, our right to choose or reject. But I said, okay. I was afraid he'd open it up because of what I had sealed up in there from the mid-1980s was nuclear. It almost killed me back then. And I was afraid he'd open it up and I would be. I'd be gone. But he took it away in an instant. Didn't have to put me to sleep like Adam to make Eve. He just opened me up and took it away. And then I was there on the floor, spinning in circles like I was on the potter's wheel. And I was his pottery, and he was reshaping me, reforming me, and then he started pouring his spirit into me, his living water. And he was pouring all night long. Somewhere in the midst of that night, I started texting messages. Non-stop, just couldn't stop texting. Don't know whatever happened with these messages. Maybe I should try looking back through my phone. I don't know if I could find them. It was actually on my other phone. It was 6 a.m. and I was still texting. Been up all night. It was 9:27 a.m. I tried to lay down for a second. Bounced right back up. Still texting. It was 10:23. I had a 10:30 doctor appointment for a follow-up for my surgery. So that's right. It was after my surgery. Because that was 6 weeks after my surgery. So that was... September. Yeah, so it was November. And I was 10 minutes late to my appointment because I couldn't stop texting messages of what God was pouring into me. It was flowing out of my heart. Had my appointment. Got out of it at 11:30. It was 5:10 p.m. that night. I was still in the parking lot at the church, or not the church, the doctor's office, texting. My battery had died in my van because I had left things turned on. Of course, in the middle of COVID, nobody wanted to give me a jump start. The city I live in, I mean, I went to the local drive-through McDonald's to get breakfast one day, and I look and there's some guy there with the hood open and jumper cables. I'm like, oh, hey, hold on, let me go help. So I pulled up next to him to go help, and he's like, oh, thanks, boy, it was cold last night. And I'm like, what? Are you telling me that you've been here all night long and nobody came to help you? He goes, yep. I'm like, I'm sorry. I said, it doesn't surprise me where I live. But so I helped him, put some oil in his engine, just kind of gave it a once over, scanned it, found a problem with the vehicle and pointed out what he needed to do to fix it. And he tried to pay me, and I appreciate that. And I said, why don't you just pay that forward to somebody else? I've said, if you can help somebody else, just go and help them. And a little sidetrack there. Okay, back off my bunny trail. And so my vehicle finally started, but for 5 days, God was pouring His Spirit into me over and over and over again, and just nonstop. I couldn't stop texting. I was begging, pleading, please, you're going to kill me. I said, was that vow I made when I was 20, those scars and wounds they sealed up inside of me, was that like a plug that blocked up and created like a dam or a reservoir of your living water, and you're pouring 26 years of your Spirit into me? I said, you can't do that. You're going to kill me. You're going to drown me. And I was begging him because my hands hurt so much for texting. The next thing you know, I started making videos. And then I was freaking out. My former self was so terrified of public speech. And I mean, in speech class in high school, I couldn't even get my name out in a speech that was supposed to tell a class about myself. I get done inside, I'm like, oh, thank God, before I actually believed in God. I made it through to the end. And yeah, any questions? Yeah, hands go up. First question. Yeah, this guy's like, yeah, what's your name? I'm like, oh my gosh, I couldn't get my name out. I'm begging God, no, you can't do this. Don't do videos through me. And it's like, I had this image about revival. And I was like, no, it'd be too embarrassing. You can't do revival through me. No. God, give me Aaron. Moses, give him up. You can't do it through me. And that's all a shadow now. It's my former self. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what people say. It doesn't matter what people think. If they think bad of me, it's okay. I'm not here to please everybody. I'm not here to please anybody. This is not about me. This is not about being something. It's just being who I am, how God made me. I'm doing this to please Him. I'm doing this to share with others. So if you have similar struggles and challenges in life, you can see a possibly good way of dealing with them instead of the knowledge of evil that most society has. So yes, here I am separated from my wife and my children. What started it was me being rear-ended. And the change to my brain, my neck, my spine, it's affecting my arms and legs and my hands and feet and so much more. And I could focus on my body like Paul with a thorn in his flesh. And he prayed to God to remove it. And God said, my grace is sufficient for thee. During this whole process and MRIs and images and stuff, come to find out I have a genetic bone disease called Paget's disease. And they saw signs of it in my pelvis and hip area. And so I'm in pain every single day, kind of like I have a broken bone that's mending and knitting itself inside of a cast. And that's all over through my body. And if you go and look at images of Paget's disease, I caution you not to do it. Because in extreme cases, a person with Paget's disease can go blind, can go deaf. The legs become severely bowed. You can have fractures and things like that. That's what the enemy wants me to think about and focus on. So I'll be like Peter, walking on the water, taking my eyes off of Jesus and start sinking. Pay more attention to the wind, the waves, the storms in life. Or maybe I feel guilty for leaving those behind in the boat, like Peter did. I don't know. Did Joseph feel guilty? Did he feel guilty after God blessed him and elevated him to second in command, only behind Pharaoh? Pharaoh gave him a wife. Pharaoh was a resource. God is Joseph's provider. Same goes for me. God is my provider. He's my creator. He's my savior, my redeemer. He loves me more than anybody on earth. That's the same for each and every one of you. So, 16 minutes in, and here's what my topic is about. Love. Do you love anybody? Do you love a spouse? Are you married? Do you love your husband or your wife? Well, what happens to your love if they don't do anything for you? What if they reject you? Or if they're afraid of you because you've changed emotionally? Not violent, not dangerous. No, but just more emotional when you were calm before, more reactive when you weren't, when you were stable before. My love has actually gotten stronger and better for my wife and family as God has removed the scales from my eyes and the hardness from my heart. I love my wife and family more now than I ever have. And I've only hugged my wife twice in almost 2 years. Haven't kissed her, haven't held her close more than one hug where she invited me to hug her. And I was sobbing and weeping for 2 to 3 minutes in her arms because it had been so long. It hurt so bad. Still hurts to be apart. But my foundation has been found. I'm no longer codependent on my wife to make me feel good about life, about myself. My foundation is God. That's what he wants to know. In these possibly end times, what is your foundation? It needs to be God. It needs to be your foundation. Otherwise, it's just sand. Something you can lose tomorrow, lose today. Something you can lose forever. But you can never lose God. If he is your foundation, you'll never lose him. Nothing can separate you from the love of God in Christ Jesus, my Lord. He won't reject you. He won't abandon you. He will love you all the way, even if you choose to reject him and end up in eternity in hell. He'll still love you. But you'll be separated because you chose to be separated. So here's my wife. Am I legally bound by a divorce decree or something to provide for her financial needs? No. I won't divorce her. It's till death do us part. I love her no matter what she does. I will provide for her. I will help her if I have permission to do. I won't use anything to try to force or manipulate her to be okay with me coming home. Love doesn't force. Love doesn't demand. Love is something you give and somebody else receives. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, so that whomsoever believes in him shall have the opportunity for everlasting life in God's presence. Gives, love gives, lust takes. My wife's first husband wished some horrifying things to happen to her. He abandoned her 6 months after she had breast cancer diagnosed. Their 2 children were 3 years and under. It's okay. He may have abandoned her. He may not have wanted her. But somebody else does. I do. I always will. I will love her until the end of my life, the end of her life. But guess what? Even in eternity, I take with me that which is in my heart. I will love her for all eternity, second only to God. That's me sharing what love is to me. See, people who get hurt and wounded react out of being hurt and wounded. But if love is there, it is stronger. It's eternal. And I hope and pray if you have hurt anybody in life and you said you truly did care about them, I hope you would go out and make sure that they're okay. I've reached out to some old girlfriends from before I became a Christian. We went out 35 years ago. Reached out to 2 of them, and at least 2 that got back to me. And it's a very eye-opening experience. I reached out because I was mortified. I was deeply wounded that I had hurt them. Not intentionally, but I was hurt and wounded. And what I was thinking and struggling with back then, I actually passed on to them. Or they didn't feel good enough. Or I hurt them emotionally. And I kind of was like, one of them, I was just like, whoa, I did a number on you? I kind of thought it was the other way around. But it doesn't matter what direction it is. If you love somebody, if you care about somebody, you want to make sure that they're okay. You want to make sure that they're free and not imprisoned by the actions, the mistakes, or the failures that you made when you were younger. Love covers a multitude of sins. Love reaches out to make sure those that you may have hurt are okay. I hope and pray that some of my transparency after midnight or whatever time it is now, 1 a.m., will help and encourage you to be more like Christ, to awaken the knowledge of good. Or was that a lie also from Satan? It's from God. God said it's the knowledge of good and evil, so it can't be a lie. So there's good that came too. Well, here's some knowledge about good. If you care or love somebody, no matter who it is, and you've hurt them in some way, let the love motivate you to reach out to them to make sure they're okay, and thus be more like Christ. Good night.